I never thought a quiet Thursday afternoon spent organizing old files in my garage would turn my entire neighborhood upside down. But that's exactly what happened when I found the envelope marked Original Development Documents buried under 20 years of dust. My name is Oliver Reeves, and I had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 7 years. It was one of those cookie-cutter developments on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, where every third house looked identical, and the HOA president, Deborah Morrison, treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. The woman had made my life hell over everything from my mailbox being the wrong shade of bronze to my grass being a quarter-inch too tall during the summer months. But nothing compared to what I was about to uncover. I had bought my house from an elderly couple who had been original owners when the development was built in 2002. When they moved to a retirement community, they left behind boxes of paperwork in the garage with a casual, "Just throw it all out if you want." I had never gotten around to it. That Thursday, my company had given everyone the afternoon off due to a building maintenance issue, so I decided to finally tackle the clutter. The envelope was thick, yellowed with age, and contained what looked like copies of the original development plans, sales agreements, and most importantly, land deeds. I spread them across my workbench, curious about the history of the neighborhood. That's when I noticed something odd. The common areas, which included our community pool, playground, walking paths, and the large park at the center of the development, were listed on the plans, but had a different designation than I expected. According to these documents, the common land was supposed to have been deeded to the HOA as part of the development's final phase. But there was a handwritten note on one of the papers that made my blood run cold. "Transfer pending final county approval. Hold in escrow until resolved." I pulled out my laptop and started cross-referencing the property records available online through the Maricopa County Assessor's website. My hands actually started shaking when I realized what I was seeing. The common areas, roughly 15 acres in total, were still listed under the name of the original development company, Sunburst Properties, LLC. I dug deeper, searching for any record of Sunburst Properties. The company had dissolved in 2008 during the financial crisis, its assets scattered to various creditors and bankruptcy proceedings. The common land had never been properly transferred to the HOA. Legally, it existed in a gray area, owned by a company that no longer existed, managed by an HOA that had no actual legal claim to it. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This meant that every fine Deborah and her board had issued for violations on common property, every special assessment they had levied for improvements to that property, every rule they enforced about its use, all of it rested on a foundation of legal quicksand. My phone buzzed. Speak of the devil. It was an email from Deborah, seed to the entire neighborhood. Violation order. Oliver Reeves, 2847 Saguaro Lane. Your vehicle was parked on the common area grass during yesterday's gathering. Fine, $250. Payment due within 15 days. I had attended a neighborhood barbecue the previous evening, and yes, I had pulled my truck slightly onto the grass near the pavilion to unload the smoker I had brought. Half the neighborhood had done the same thing, but Deborah had a special radar for anything I did. A slow smile spread across my face. I had been looking for a way to push back against Deborah's tyranny for years, and now I had something nuclear. But I needed to be smart about this. I needed to verify everything beyond any doubt before I made a move. I spent the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening making calls and sending emails. I reached out to a real estate attorney named Marcus Chen who had helped me with my home purchase years ago. I scanned and sent him every document I had found. By 9 p.m., he called me back. "Oliver, this is absolutely wild," Marcus said, his voice filled with barely contained excitement. "If what you're showing me is accurate, and if there really is no subsequent deed transfer recorded, then yes, your HOA has been operating under a completely false assumption of ownership for over 2 decades. What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means chaos," Marcus replied bluntly. "Every decision they've made regarding that property could be challenged. Every improvement they've funded with dues or special assessments could be considered unauthorized. Depending on how the bankruptcy proceedings for Sunburst Properties were handled, the land might have ended up with creditors, with the county, or in legal limbo. We need to do a full title search. How long will that take? I can have a preliminary report by Monday. A complete one might take 2 weeks. But Oliver, I have to ask, what's your end game here? If you expose this, you're going to create a massive legal mess that affects everyone in your development, including you." I thought about Deborah's email, about the $250 fine for a non-existent offense. I thought about my neighbor, an elderly widow named Patricia, who had been fined $500 for having the wrong color flowers in her front yard. I thought about the young couple down the street who had been threatened with a lien on their house because their kid's basketball hoop was 2 feet too close to the street. My endgame is making sure Deborah Morrison understands she's not the queen of this neighborhood, I said. Start the title search. I'll wait for your report before I do anything. That weekend was torture. I went about my normal routine, mowing my lawn, washing my car, waving to neighbors, all while sitting on information that could detonate the entire community. Deborah drove past my house twice on Saturday, slowing down both times, clearly looking for new violations to cite. I made sure everything was absolutely perfect. Sunday evening, I got a text from my friend Jake Morris, who lived 3 streets over. Hey man, HOA meeting Tuesday night. Deborah's trying to push through another special assessment for resurfacing the pool deck. $3,000 per household, can you believe this? I texted back, I'll be there. I had never attended an HOA meeting before. Despite living in Meadowbrook Estates for 7 years, I had always viewed the meetings as Deborah's personal stage for theatrical displays of petty power. But now I had a reason to watch the show up close. Monday morning, Marcus called before I even finished my first coffee. Oliver, you're not going to believe this. The title search confirms it. The common area land is still technically owned by Sunburst Properties LLC, a dissolved entity. The bankruptcy proceedings from 2008 show the land was listed as an asset, but there's no record of it being transferred to any creditor or purchaser. It essentially fell through the cracks. How is that even possible? Bureaucratic nightmare combined with financial crisis chaos, Marcus explained. Sunburst Properties went bankrupt right when the housing market collapsed. Courts were overwhelmed. Companies were folding left and right. This piece of land probably seemed insignificant compared to the other assets being fought over. The property taxes on it are minimal because it's undeveloped common space. Nobody noticed it slipping into limbo, so who actually owns it now? That's the million-dollar question. It could theoretically revert to the county. It could still be tied up in the dissolved company's estate, which might be reopenable. It could potentially be claimed through adverse possession by the HOA, but that would require proving continuous, hostile, and open use for a specific period, and it's murky whether their management constitutes the right kind of possession. This is going to require litigation to sort out. What about all the money the HOA has spent on maintaining and improving the property? Marcus let out a long breath. That's where it gets really messy. If they've been operating under a good faith belief that they own the property, they might be able to recover some costs. But if it turns out someone else has a claim to the land, the HOA could be liable for unauthorized improvements to property they don't own, and every homeowner who paid into those improvements could potentially have a claim against the HOA board for mismanagement, including this new $3,000 assessment Deborah wants to push through, especially that. Oliver, if you're going to drop this bomb, Tuesday night's meeting would be the time. But I'm telling you, as your attorney and your friend, this is going to get ugly. Real ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Absolutely. Can you come to the meeting with me? Wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll bring copies of the title search and the relevant documents. Tuesday evening arrived with the oppressive heat that Phoenix is famous for. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a building that sat right in the middle of the disputed common land. I found that ironic. Marcus met me in the parking lot, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive and important. Ready to poke the hornet's nest? He asked with a slight grin. Let's do this. The community center's main room was set up with rows of folding chairs, facing a long table where the HOA board sat. Deborah occupied the center position, flanked by her vice president Richard Spence, treasurer Linda Kowalski, and 2 other board members whose names I could never remember. About 40 homeowners were scattered among the chairs, most of them looking resigned and bored. Deborah called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. She was exactly what you'd picture when you heard the words, HOA president. Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in that aggressive bob that screamed, I want to speak to your manager, and a permanent expression that suggested she was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, she announced in a voice that could cut glass. We have several important items on the agenda tonight, But first, I'd like to address some recent violation issues. She pulled out a stack of papers and started reading off names and offenses. Mrs. Chen had her garbage cans visible from the street. The Johnsons had a decorative lawn gnome that exceeded the permitted height. Mr. Patterson had painted his front door without submitting the color for pre-approval. I watched the faces of my neighbors. Most looked down at their laps, resigned to this ritual humiliation. A few looked angry, but stayed silent. This was Deborah's kingdom, and she ruled through fear. Now then, Deborah continued, we move to new business. As you're all aware, our community pool deck is showing significant wear after 19 years. The board has obtained quotes from 3 contractors, and we're recommending we proceed with a complete resurfacing and upgrade. The total cost will be $447,000, which breaks down to approximately $3,000 per household as a special assessment. Groans erupted around the room. Jake raised his hand. Deborah, that's the 3rd special assessment in 2 years. A lot of us are already stretched thin. Maintaining our community standards requires investment, Deborah replied coldly. If you can't afford to live in Meadowbrook Estates, perhaps you should consider relocating to a more affordable neighborhood. The silence that followed was murderous. This was classic Deborah, implying that anyone who questioned her decisions was somehow inadequate or poor. Are there any other questions before we vote? Deborah asked, clearly expecting none. I stood up. Yes, I have several questions. Deborah's eyes narrowed when she saw me. Mr. Reeves, how surprising to see you at a meeting. Are you here to contest your recent parking violation fine? No. I'm here to ask about the legal ownership of the common area land we're discussing improving, I said calmly. What are you talking about? Deborah's voice had an edge of annoyance. I'm talking about who actually owns the pool, the deck you want to resurface, and the land it sits on. Who owns the common areas of this development? The HOA owns them, obviously, Deborah snapped. Now if you're finished wasting everyone's time, can you provide documentation of that ownership? I interrupted. Specifically, can you show me the deed that transferred the common area land from the developer to the HOA? The room had gone completely silent. Linda Kowalski, the treasurer, was frantically flipping through a folder in front of her. Richard Spence looked confused. That's proprietary HOA business, Deborah said. But I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Actually, property ownership is public record, Marcus said, standing up beside me. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a real estate attorney. Mr. Reeves hired me to conduct a title search on the common area properties. Would the board like to see what we found? Deborah's face had gone pale. This is highly irregular. You can't just derail a meeting with random accusations. I'm not making accusations, I said. I'm asking a simple question. Does the HOA have a deed to the common area land? Linda whispered something to Deborah, who shook her head violently. Richard Spence spoke up. The original documents should be in our records. Linda, where are the original development documents? I don't know, Linda admitted, her voice small. I assumed they were filed with the county. We've been operating as owners for over 20 years. We pay for maintenance, we make improvements. Operating as owners and legally owning are 2 very different things, Marcus said. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. May I approach the board? Deborah looked like she wanted to refuse, but dozens of eyes were watching. She gave a curt nod. Marcus walked forward and placed copies of the title search in front of each board member. What you're looking at is a complete title history of the common area parcels, Marcus explained, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. As you can see, the land was originally owned by Sunburst Properties LLC, the developer. There are notes in the development plans indicating the land was supposed to be transferred to the HOA upon completion of the project. However, no such transfer was ever recorded with Maricopa County. Sunburst Properties dissolved in 2008, and the land fell into legal limbo. According to current county records, these parcels are still listed under the dissolved company's name. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once, voices rising in confusion and anger. Deborah pounded her gavel repeatedly. This is absurd, she shouted. We've been managing this property for 23 years. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on it. We own it through adverse possession, if nothing else. Adverse possession requires specific legal elements that may not be met here, Marcus countered. And even if it could apply, it would require a court to formally grant title. Until that happens, the ownership is questionable at best. Jake stood up. Wait, so you're telling me that every special assessment we've paid for improvements to the common areas was potentially spent on property the HOA doesn't even own? That's exactly what I'm saying, Marcus confirmed, chaos. Pure chaos. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Deborah kept pounding her gavel, but she had lost control of the room. I saw people pulling out their phones, probably calling family members or lawyers. "Everyone, please!" Richard Spence finally yelled loud enough to cut through the noise. "Let's all calm down. This is clearly a complex situation that needs investigation. I propose we table the special assessment vote until we can get our own legal counsel to review these claims." "Good idea," someone shouted from the back. "And while you're at it, maybe get a lawyer who isn't on Deborah's payroll." Deborah's face was bright red. "How dare you? Everything this board has done has been for the good of the community." "Yeah? Then why didn't you know we don't actually own the property?" Another voice called out. The meeting disintegrated from there. Deborah tried to restore order, but it was pointless. People were forming clusters, arguing and speculating. Several homeowners approached Marcus and me asking questions. Within 20 minutes, the board gave up and adjourned the meeting, though barely anyone noticed. As people filed out, Deborah stalked over to me. Her eyes were blazing with fury. "You've made a huge mistake," she hissed. "You've created a crisis where there wasn't one. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've asked a question that apparently nobody on the board bothered to ask in 23 years, I replied calmly. "If the HOA doesn't own the land, don't you think we should know that before spending another $447,000 on it?" "We'll fight this," Deborah said. "We'll prove ownership, and when we do, you'll be responsible for every legal fee we incur." "I look forward to seeing that in court," I said. She spun on her heel and marched out, her board members trailing behind her, like confused ducklings. Marcus and I walked to our cars together. "Well, you certainly know how to make an entrance," he said with a chuckle. "My phone is already blowing up. I think half the neighborhood is going to want to hire me." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now? Now it gets complicated. The HOA will hire lawyers. They'll try to establish ownership or at least clear title. But the real question is what happens if they can't? If the land truly is in limbo, someone will need to petition the court to determine rightful ownership. That could be the HOA. It could be creditors from the bankruptcy. It could be the county. It's going to take months, maybe years to sort out. And in the meantime, I'd suggest the HOA be very careful about enforcing any rules related to the common areas. And they definitely shouldn't be collecting money for improvements to property they might not own. I drove home that night feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. I had lobbed a grenade into the middle of my neighborhood, and I wasn't entirely sure what the fallout would be. But Deborah had been operating like a tyrant for years, and if this was what it took to check her power, so be it. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. I answered it in my pajama pants and t-shirt to find a man in an expensive suit holding a leather folder. "Oliver Reeves?" he asked. "That's me, you've been served." He handed me the folder and walked away. I opened it standing right there in my doorway. The HOA was suing me for defamation, tortious interference, and seeking an emergency injunction to prevent me from spreading false information about property ownership. The lawsuit was filed by Deborah Morrison personally and the HOA board collectively. I called Marcus immediately. "They're suing me." "Oh wow, she works fast. Forward me the documents. This is actually good for us." "How is getting sued good?" "Because now we're in court, which is exactly where this issue needs to be resolved, and their claims are weak. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and you told the truth. We'll counterclaim for declaratory judgment on the property ownership question and probably add a claim for abuse of process. Don't worry, Oliver. You just rattled a cage that needed rattling." The next few weeks were surreal. The lawsuit became the only thing anyone in Meadowbrook Estates could talk about. The neighborhood split into factions. Some people supported Deborah and the board, viewing my actions as reckless and destructive. Others saw me as a hero, standing up to an oppressive regime. Most people were just confused and worried about what it all meant for their property values and their previous HOA payments. Marcus filed our response and counterclaim, which included a motion to join the county as a party to help resolve the ownership question. The judge assigned to the case, Judge Sharon Martinez, scheduled a preliminary hearing for 3 weeks out. During that time, I became something of a pariah in certain circles. Deborah's allies would literally cross the street to avoid me. I received several anonymous hate letters in my mailbox calling me everything from a troublemaker to a communist. One particularly creative individual left a bag of dog waste on my porch with a note that read, "This is what you've done to our neighborhood." But I also received support. Patricia, the elderly widow who had been fined for her flowers, baked me cookies and left them with a note thanking me. Jake organized a small gathering at his house, where about 15 homeowners showed up to discuss forming an opposition slate for the next HOA election. The young couple with the basketball hoop, Robert and Michelle Davidson, started a Facebook group called Meadowbrook Estates Transparency Task Force that quickly gained over 100 members. The HOA, meanwhile, was scrambling. They hired a law firm called Patterson and Associates that specialized in HOA litigation. I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that the legal fees were already approaching $50,000, all coming from HOA reserves. This didn't sit well with homeowners who were now questioning every dollar the board spent. Deborah made things worse for herself by trying to continue business as usual. She sent out violation notices, including one to me for having a lawn chair visible from the street. She tried to schedule another board meeting to vote on the pool deck assessment, but had to cancel it when over 100 homeowners showed up, many of them openly hostile. Then things took an interesting turn. A company called Westridge Development, LLC, filed a motion to intervene in the lawsuit. According to their filing, Westridge had purchased several assets from Sunburst Properties' bankruptcy estate in 2009, and they believed the common area land might be among those assets. They had a team of lawyers and demanded a seat at the table. "This just keeps getting better," Marcus told me over the phone. "Now we've got 4 parties all claiming interest in the property: the HOA, Westridge Development, the county, and technically the dissolved Sunburst Properties, though there's nobody to represent them. Judge Martinez is going to need aspirin after dealing with this." The preliminary hearing arrived on a Wednesday morning. I took the day off work and met Marcus at the Maricopa County Superior Court building in downtown Phoenix. The courtroom was surprisingly full. At least 20 homeowners had shown up, along with reporters from 2 local news stations in the Arizona Republic newspaper. Apparently, my little property dispute had become newsworthy. Judge Martinez was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She surveyed the packed courtroom with evident displeasure. "Well," she said dryly, "I can see this isn't going to be a typical property dispute. Let's start with introductions. Counsel for the plaintiffs." A lawyer in a 3-piece suit stood up. "Gerald Patterson, Your Honor, representing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and board members." Counsel for the defendant, Marcus stood. Marcus Chen, representing Oliver Reeves. Counsel for the intervener, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, rose. Amanda Blackstone, representing Westridge Development, LLC. Judge Martinez nodded. "And I see we have representatives from the county attorney's office as well. Mr. Simmons, are you here to take a position?" A tired-looking man in a rumpled suit stood. "Your Honor, the county's position is that we want clarity on ownership as much as anyone. These parcels have been in a tax gray area for years. We're here to facilitate resolution, not to claim ownership." "How refreshing," Judge Martinez said. "An attorney who doesn't want something. All right, let's address the emergency injunction first. Mr. Patterson, your clients want to prevent Mr. Reeves from discussing the property ownership issue. On what grounds?" Patterson launched into an argument about how my baseless allegations were causing panic and damaging the HOA's ability to function. Judge Martinez let him talk for about 3 minutes before holding up her hand. "Mr. Patterson, has your client actually established ownership of the common area parcels?" "We've been operating as owners for 23 years, Your Honor. We've maintained the property, paid for improvements. That's not what I asked." "Do you have a deed?" Patterson hesitated. "We're working to establish clear title through adverse possession and equitable ownership principles." "So that's a no, Mr. Chen. Does your client have evidence that the deed is questionable?" Marcus handed a folder to the bailiff. "We've provided copies of the title search and original development documents, Your Honor. The evidence is clear that no deed transfer was ever recorded." Judge Martinez flipped through the documents in silence. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear people breathing. "Mr. Patterson, I'm not going to enjoin someone from telling the truth. If your client doesn't have clear title, that's a problem your client created, not Mr. Reeves. Motion for emergency injunction is denied." I felt a surge of relief. Deborah, sitting in the front row behind her lawyer, Looked like she might spontaneously combust. Now then, Judge Martinez continued, let's talk about the bigger issue. Ms. Blackstone, you claim your client purchased this property in bankruptcy proceedings. Amanda Blackstone stood smoothly. We believe so, Your Honor. The bankruptcy involved hundreds of parcels and assets. Our client purchased several blocks of properties in a bulk sale. The records from 2009 are somewhat chaotic, but we have reason to believe these parcels were included. Do you have proof? We're working on gathering the documentation. The bankruptcy court records are extensive. In other words, you're not sure. Judge Martinez didn't sound impressed. Here's what's going to happen. I'm ordering a comprehensive title examination by an independent court-appointed expert. All parties will cooperate fully. I want a complete chain of title from the original developer forward, and I want a legal analysis of whether any party has established ownership through adverse possession or other means. This report will be completed within 90 days. In the meantime, I'm issuing a preliminary injunction preventing the HOA from making any major expenditures or improvements to the disputed parcels until ownership is established. Regular maintenance is fine, but no special assessments, no major construction projects. Are we clear? Your Honor, the pool deck is a safety issue, Patterson protested. Then rope it off until we sort this out. Anything else? Nobody had anything else. Judge Martinez banged her gavel and left the bench. I looked at Marcus, who was grinning. That went well, he said. Deborah stormed past us without a word, but I caught the look of pure hatred she shot my way. Her lawyer Patterson stopped to talk with Marcus for a moment, and I wandered out to the hallway where homeowners were gathering. Does this mean we don't have to pay the assessment? Someone asked. It means the board can't collect it right now, I explained. But honestly, the bigger question is what happens if it turns out we never owned the land at all? Could we lose access to the pool, to the park? This came from a worried mother holding a toddler's hand. I don't know, I admitted. That's what the court process will determine. Over the next 3 months, life in Meadowbrook Estates became increasingly strange. The HOA board continued to meet and handle basic business, but their authority had been fundamentally undermined. When they sent out violation notices, people started ignoring them or challenging them, knowing the board was distracted by the lawsuit. Deborah tried to maintain her iron grip, but it was slipping through her fingers. The court-appointed title expert was a meticulous woman named Dr. Sarah Fitzgerald, who taught real estate law at Arizona State University. She conducted extensive research, interviewed witnesses, and pored over decades of records. Marcus told me she was one of the most thorough people he'd ever seen. Meanwhile, Westridge Development's claim started to fall apart. Their lawyers couldn't produce documentation showing the common area parcels had been included in their bulk purchase. They eventually withdrew from the case, though they reserved the right to refile if new evidence emerged. In July, 3 months after the hearing, Dr. Fitzgerald submitted her report. It was 147 pages long and devastating for the HOA. The conclusions were clear. The common area land had never been properly deeded to the HOA. Sunburst Properties had dissolved without resolving the transfer, and the land was in legal limbo. However, Dr. Fitzgerald also noted that the HOA had a strong claim for adverse possession based on their continuous, open, and notorious management of the property for over 20 years. She recommended the court grant title to the HOA, but only after the HOA demonstrated accountability for how they had managed the property and how they would manage it going forward. A second hearing was scheduled for August. This time, even more homeowners showed up, packing the courtroom beyond capacity. Judge Martinez had to move us to a larger courtroom. I've read Dr. Fitzgerald's excellent report, Judge Martinez began, and I'm prepared to rule. However, I want to hear from some of the affected homeowners first. This isn't just about legal technicalities. This is about a community. She invited anyone who wanted to speak to approach the microphone set up in the gallery. I was surprised when Patricia, the elderly widow, stood up and walked forward. Your Honor, my name is Patricia Webb, and I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 18 years. I want to tell you what it's been like living under this HOA board. Her voice shook but held firm. I was fined $500 for planting purple flowers instead of red ones. When my husband died last year, I was grieving, and I let my lawn go for 2 weeks. They threatened to put a lien on my house. I've lived in fear of these people for years. Others followed. Jake talked about the basketball hoop fine. The Davidsons discussed how they'd been harassed for minor violations, while Deborah's friends seemed to break rules with impunity. One man described how he'd been fined $1, 0 for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight because it had his company logo on it. Story after story painted a picture of an HOA board, led by Deborah, that had operated with unchecked power and used it to bully and intimidate residents. Judge Martinez listened to all of it, her expression growing increasingly stern. When the homeowners finished, she turned to the HOA's lawyer. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to grant title to the HOA through adverse possession, but with significant conditions. First, the current board is going to be placed under court supervision for a period of 2 years. That means major decisions require court approval. Second, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years. Third, I'm ordering the board to adopt new bylaws that include term limits, recall provisions, and a transparent appeals process for violations. These new bylaws must be approved by a vote of the homeowners, not just the board." Deborah jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. You can't just dictate how we run our HO." "Sit down, Ms. Morrison," Judge Martinez said sharply. "I absolutely can impose conditions when granting equitable relief like adverse possession. You've been managing property you didn't legally own. You should be grateful I'm granting you title at all rather than declaring it abandoned and awarding it to the county. My conditions stand. Court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in applause. Deborah looked like she'd been slapped. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, probably warning her not to say anything else. Outside the courthouse, I was mobbed by grateful neighbors. People were shaking my hand, thanking me, treating me like I'd liberated them from an occupying force. It felt surreal. Marcus pulled me aside. "Nice work. You just fundamentally changed how your HOA operates." "Think Deborah will resign?" I asked. "Not a chance. That woman would rather burn the neighborhood down than admit defeat. But with court supervision and a forensic audit coming, she's not going to be able to operate the way she used to." Marcus was right. Deborah didn't resign. But the forensic audit, completed 6 weeks later, revealed problems that went far beyond property ownership issues. The auditor, a CPA named Raymond Torres, found significant irregularities in the HOA's financial records. Over the past 5 years, approximately $127,000 in HOA funds couldn't be properly accounted for. Some expenses had vague descriptions like administrative costs or community improvements with no supporting documentation. Several large payments had been made to a landscaping company owned by Deborah's brother-in-law, always just under the threshold that would have required competitive bidding according to the HOA's bylaws. Most damning, the audit revealed that Deborah had used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses on multiple occasions. A $4,000 office upgrade had actually been furniture for her home office. A community relations dinner for $2. $800 had been a vacation dinner in Sedona with her husband. The list went on. When the audit results were released to the homeowners, the reaction was volcanic. An emergency meeting was called and over 200 people showed up. This time, Deborah wasn't the one in control. Jake, who had emerged as a leader of the opposition group, moved for a vote of no confidence in the board. The motion passed with 87% support. Under Arizona law and the HOA's bylaws, this triggered a special election for all board positions. But before the election could take place, things took an even darker turn. Several homeowners, emboldened by the audit findings, filed a police report alleging embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. The Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime unit opened an investigation. 2 weeks later, detectives showed up at Deborah's house at 6 in the morning with a warrant. They seized her computer, financial records, and boxes of HOA documents. Neighbors watched from their windows and yards as Deborah was escorted to a police car, not in handcuffs yet, but clearly being taken in for questioning. The investigation moved quickly. The evidence was well documented thanks to the forensic audit. Prosecutors from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office charged Deborah Morrison with 8 counts of theft, 3 counts of fraud, and 2 counts of forgery related to falsified HOA documents. The trial took place the following spring. I attended several days of testimony. It was strange seeing Deborah in a defendant's chair instead of at the head of an HOA board table. She had aged noticeably, the stress of the investigation and prosecution showing in new lines on her face. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They walked the jury through each instance of misappropriated funds, showing canceled checks, invoices, and Deborah's own emails coordinating the schemes. Her lawyer tried to argue that these were administrative mistakes and accounting errors. But the pattern was too clear. The moment that stuck with me most was when Patricia Webb testified. She explained how she'd struggled to pay the $500 flower violation fine on her fixed income, going without groceries for a week to make the payment. The prosecutor then showed the jury how Deborah had spent $600 of HOA funds on a spa day during the same month. Several jurors looked visibly angry. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Deborah guilty on all counts. At sentencing 2 months later, Judge Martinez, the same judge who had handled the property case, sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of $127,000 to the HOA. Ms. Morrison, you held a position of trust in your community, Judge Martinez said. Instead of serving your neighbors, you treated them as a personal piggy bank. You bullied people with violations and fines while stealing their money. The sentence of this court reflects the seriousness of your betrayal. Deborah was led away in handcuffs. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I had wanted to stop her tyranny, but I had never imagined it would end with her going to prison. The HOA election happened a month before Deborah's sentencing. Jake ran for president and won overwhelmingly. The rest of the new board were reasonable people who had been vocal critics of the old regime. One of their first acts was to formally accept the title to the common area land that Judge Martinez had granted, along with all the court-imposed conditions. The new board operated differently from day one. They held monthly town halls where any homeowner could speak. They published detailed financial reports online. They revised the violation process to include warnings and reasonable appeals. They even voted to refund several recent fines that had been excessive or unjustified, including my $250 parking fine. Most importantly, they put together a package of new bylaws that included everything Judge Martinez had ordered and more. Term limits for all board positions, a recall process that required only 30% of homeowners to trigger, an independent review board for violation disputes, clear spending limits, and mandatory competitive bidding for contracts. The homeowners approved the new bylaws with 92% voting in favor. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal, though it was a different kind of normal than before. People were more engaged, more willing to speak up, more aware of what their HOA was doing. The pool deck eventually got resurfaced using properly authorized and documented funds. The park got new playground equipment. But now everyone knew where the money was going and had a say in how it was spent. I never did throw out those old documents from the garage. Instead, I framed the envelope and hung it in my home office as a reminder that sometimes the most mundane tasks lead to extraordinary results. A year after everything began, I was grilling burgers in my backyard on a Saturday afternoon when Jake came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, handing me a bottle. "Thanks, man." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the smoke rise from the grill. "You know, I was thinking," Jake said. "A year ago, if someone had told me that you'd bring down the HOA president, expose a major financial crime, and completely reform how our neighborhood operates, all because you cleaned your garage, I'd have said they were crazy." I laughed. "Yeah, it's been a weird year. Weird, but good. Patricia told me the other day that she's not afraid to check her mail anymore. She used to dread it because there was always some new violation notice. Now she plants whatever flowers she wants. That's what it's all about," I said. "People should feel comfortable in their own homes. Speaking of which, have you heard the latest?" Jake grinned. "The restitution money Deborah has to pay back? The board voted to use it to eliminate special assessments for the next 2 years. Basically, everyone gets a break on their dues because of the money she stole. That's poetic justice right there." We clinked our bottles together and drank to that. The whole experience taught me something important about power and accountability. HOAs exist to maintain community standards and protect property values, but when they operate without oversight or transparency, they can become instruments of oppression. It takes just one person willing to ask difficult questions to start changing things. I also learned that sometimes the biggest discoveries come from the most unexpected places. Those documents had sat in my garage for 7 years, gathering dust while Deborah ran roughshod over the neighborhood. If I had thrown them away years ago, or if I had decided to clean the garage on a different day, or if I hadn't bothered to actually read what I found, everything would have continued as it was. The property ownership issue, which had seemed so explosive at the time, ended up being resolved fairly smoothly. Once the court granted title to the HOA through adverse possession, the county updated its records, and the legal limbo ended. The common areas were now properly deeded to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, and all future transactions would have a clear chain of title. But more importantly, the process of discovering and resolving the ownership issue had exposed the deeper problems with how the HOA operated. It had created an opening for reform that might never have existed otherwise. Deborah's financial crimes might have continued indefinitely if the audit had never been ordered. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just paid the $250 parking fine and moved on with my life. Would someone else have eventually found those documents? Would Deborah have continued stealing and bullying until she finally pushed someone too far, or would she have retired eventually, leaving a new tyrant to take her place? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and that's okay. What matters is what actually happened. A community learned to stand up for itself. A corrupt leader faced consequences for her actions. Systems were put in place to prevent future abuse, and all because I spent a Thursday afternoon cleaning my garage. My neighbors still thank me sometimes, though less frequently now that things have settled into a comfortable routine. Patricia bakes me cookies every Christmas. The Davidsons named their new baby dog after me, which is either an honor or an insult, depending on how you look at it. Jake and I have become close friends, getting together regularly to watch football and complain about work. The Meadowbrook Estates Transparency Task Force Facebook group that Michelle Davidson started is still active, with over 300 members now. People use it to discuss HOA issues, organize neighborhood events, and keep tabs on what the board is doing. It's become a vital tool for maintaining the accountability and engagement that had been so lacking before. The community center, where that fateful meeting took place, now has a plaque on the wall commemorating the reforms. Jake insisted on it when he became president over my embarrassed objections. It reads, "In recognition of the homeowners who stood up for transparency and justice, reminding us that community leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege." Every time I drive past it, I feel a mixture of pride and disbelief. I'm just a regular guy who found some old papers in his garage. But sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes one person asking the right questions at the right time can change everything. As for Deborah Morrison, she served 18 months of her 3-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Tucson after getting out, presumably to escape the shame and notoriety she had earned in Phoenix. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I have my doubts. People like Deborah don't usually change fundamentally. They just find new arenas for their need to control others. The last time I saw her was actually in the courthouse hallway on the day of her sentencing. She was waiting with her lawyer for the hearing to begin, and I walked past on my way to the bathroom. Our eyes met for just a moment. I expected to see hatred or defiance, but what I saw instead was something sadder. She looked lost, like she couldn't comprehend how she had ended up there. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Patricia going without groceries to pay an unjust fine. I remembered the young couple threatened with liens over a basketball hoop. I remembered all the petty cruelties and abuses of power, large and small, that Deborah had inflicted on her neighbors for years. No, she had earned every day of that sentence and more. Justice, when it finally arrives, often feels both satisfying and inadequate. You want to feel purely victorious, but real life is messier than that. Today, Meadowbrook Estates is a genuinely nice place to live. The HOA enforces rules fairly and transparently. Board meetings are well attended and productive rather than theatrical displays of power. Violation notices are rare and, when issued, proportionate to the actual offense. The common areas are well maintained and properly owned, with no legal ambiguity casting shadows over their use. Property values have actually increased since the reforms, which surprised some people but made sense when you thought about it. People want to live in communities where they feel respected and heard, not ones run by petty tyrants. When prospective buyers research Meadowbrook Estates now, they find articles about the reforms and the new transparent governance structure. It's become a selling point. I still live in the same house on Saguaro Lane. My grass is exactly the right height, not because I'm afraid of fines, but because I take pride in my home. My mailbox is still the slightly wrong shade of bronze, and nobody cares. I park wherever I need to at neighborhood gatherings, and nobody sends me nasty emails about it. Last month, the new board asked me to join as an at-large member to fill a vacancy. I declined politely. I've learned that I'm better at identifying problems than managing solutions. Besides, I like being able to criticize freely without the responsibility of actually running things. That probably makes me a hypocrite, but I'm comfortable with that. Marcus Chen still handles occasional legal work for the HOA, now at reasonable rates and with proper oversight. He tells me we should write a book about the whole experience, that it would be a bestseller in the HOA reform community. I tell him that sounds incredibly boring to anyone who hasn't lived through HOA tyranny. But maybe he's right. Maybe our story could help other people trapped under unreasonable boards. The envelope of documents is still framed in my office. Sometimes, when I'm working from home, I'll glance at it and marvel at the chain of events it triggered. Such a small thing, really. Yellowed papers in a dusty envelope forgotten in a garage for years. But inside was the key to everything, the crack in the foundation that brought down an entire regime. I've thought a lot about what the lesson is in all of this. Is it about the importance of property records and clear title? Is it about the dangers of unchecked HOA power? Is it about standing up to bullies? Maybe it's all of those things, or maybe it's something simpler. Maybe the lesson is just that you should clean your garage more often. You never know what you might find, or maybe, on a more serious note, the lesson is that ordinary people have more power than they realize. We get caught up in thinking that the systems around us are immutable, that the people in charge are untouchable, that nothing we do as individuals matters. But that's not true. One person asking difficult questions, demanding accountability, and refusing to back down can start a cascade of change. It's not easy. There were days during all of this when I questioned whether it was worth it. When I got served with lawsuit papers, when I received anonymous hate mail, when neighbors I'd known for years stopped talking to me, I wondered if I should have just kept my mouth shut and paid the fine. The easy path is almost always to comply, to not make waves, to let injustice slide if it's not directly affecting you at that moment. But I couldn't do it. Something in me rebelled at the idea of letting Deborah Morrison continue to bully and steal from people. Maybe it was principle. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was just that I was tired of being pushed around. Whatever it was, I'm glad I listened to it. The phone calls and emails eventually stopped. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice after Deborah's criminal conviction. The neighborhood settled into its new normal. Life went on, as it always does. But, better than before, I still see Patricia tending her garden, which now bursts with purple flowers in glorious violation of the old rules. I still see kids playing basketball in driveways, their hoops exactly where they're convenient, rather than where some arbitrary rule says they should be. I still see Jake at board meetings, taking his responsibilities seriously but not taking himself too seriously, the way leadership should work. And every time I pull into my driveway and see my slightly wrong shade of bronze mailbox standing there defiantly, I smile. It's the little victories that matter most. The freedom to plant the flowers you want, to park where you need to live in your home without fear of petty persecution from power-hungry neighbors. That's what I was fighting for all along, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. Not just property rights or financial accountability, though those mattered, but the simple human dignity of being able to live peacefully in the place you call home, surrounded by neighbors who treat each other with respect rather than regarding each other as subjects to be ruled. Meadowbrook Estates isn't perfect now. We still have disputes and disagreements. The HOA still enforces rules because some rules are necessary for community living. But there's a fundamental difference between rules enforced fairly, by people accountable to their neighbors, and rules wielded as weapons by petty tyrants. We learned that difference the hard way. But we learned it, and that knowledge has made all the difference. As I write this, sitting in my home office with that framed envelope on the wall behind me, I can hear kids playing in the park on the common land that almost destroyed us all. Their laughter drifts through my open window on the warm Phoenix evening. The pool is full of families enjoying the new deck that was finally installed with proper authorization and transparent spending. The walking paths wind through the development, well-maintained and genuinely communal. This is what an HOA should be. Not a source of fear and frustration, but a tool for neighbors to work together to maintain something good. It took a crisis to get us here, and a lot of people suffered along the way. But we made it through, and we're better for it. I never wanted to be a neighborhood activist or a symbol of HOA reform. I just wanted to grill burgers in my backyard and live peacefully in my home. But sometimes life puts you in a position where you have to choose between comfort and conscience, between the easy path and the right one. I chose conscience. I chose the right path, even when it was hard, and I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat, knowing everything I know now about the costs and consequences, because at the end of the day, We all have to live with ourselves, and I'd rather live knowing I stood up to a bully and helped my community than knowing I stayed silent and let injustice continue for the sake of my own convenience. That's the real lesson of Meadowbrook Estates. Not about property law or HOA governance or forensic audits, though all of those played their part. The real lesson is about having the courage to speak up when something is wrong, even when it's scary, even when it's uncertain, even when everyone tells you to just let it go. Sometimes one voice is enough to start a chorus. Sometimes one question is enough to unravel a lie. Sometimes one dusty envelope forgotten in a garage is enough to change everything. I'm glad I cleaned my garage that Thursday afternoon. I'm glad I found those documents. I'm glad I asked the questions nobody else had thought to ask. And I'm glad I live in a neighborhood where people can plant purple flowers, park their work trucks in their own driveways, and check their mail without dread. That's worth every moment of stress, every legal fee, every uncomfortable confrontation, every anonymous hate letter, and every lawsuit threat. That's worth everything it took to get here. And if Deborah Morrison ever reads this from wherever she is now, I hope she understands that this isn't about revenge or vindication. It's about justice, accountability, and the simple principle that people in positions of power must be answerable to those they serve. The sun is setting over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would definitely violate the old HOA color palette restrictions. I can hear my neighbors talking and laughing outside, enjoying the community we've built together. Tomorrow, Jake and I are meeting to talk about organizing a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the second anniversary of the reforms. Life is good in Meadowbrook Estates. Not perfect, but good, and that's all any of us can really ask for. A place to call home, neighbors who respect each other, and a community that works together rather than being ruled by fear. I raise my beer to that framed envelope on the wall, silently thanking whoever decided to save those documents 20 years ago. They probably never imagined the impact they would have, the changes they would trigger, the justice they would help bring. But that's how history works sometimes. Small moments, seemingly insignificant decisions, random discoveries that change everything. We never know which actions will ripple outward to reshape the world around us. All we can do is try to do the right thing when the moment comes. Try to stand up when we see injustice. Try to ask questions when things don't make sense. Try to speak for those who are afraid to speak for themselves. I didn't set out to be a hero. I just cleaned my garage and asked a question. But sometimes that's all it takes to start something extraordinary. And if there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone living under an oppressive HOA, it's this. Don't assume the people in power know what they're doing. Don't assume they have authority just because they act like they do. Don't assume you're powerless just because they want you to believe you are. Ask questions. Demand documentation. Verify claims. Stand up for your rights and the rights of your neighbors. It won't always be easy, and it won't always be fun, but it will always be worth it. Because at the end of the day, a community is only as strong as the people who are willing to fight for it. And sometimes one person willing to fight is all it takes to wake everyone else up and remind them of their own power. That's what I did. That's what we all did together. And now Meadowbrook Estates is a place where people want to live, not a place where people feel trapped. That's a pretty good legacy for a dusty envelope and a man who just wanted to clean his garage.